Hello everyone, my name is Emma Schultz. I'm from the University of Nebraska Medical Center, and my project was investigating the increasing incidence trends of thyroid cancer in Cyprus. So, go right ahead. The study site was the Bank of Cyprus Oncology Center located in Nicosia, Cyprus, which is right in the middle here. And this is just a map of the island and an overview of the population. So quite a small island, and we kind of realized really quick that you could drive an hour to a beach on like any coast that you wanted. So it was smaller than I expected. The background information about thyroid cancer in Cyprus is that the incidence is kind of alarmingly increasing, and a CEESP study in 2012 did a study of their cancer registry and found these rates of the increase in thyroid cancer from 9.9 cases in 1998 to 2002 increased to 20.1 in 2006 and 2009, so quite a big jump. And it's very prevalent in females with an annual percentage change of 10%, the third highest incidence in females, and fifth incidence overall between both sexes. And here's kind of a summary again of those rates, and you can see that thyroid cancer is the most quickly increasing rate of all those female cancers. So the study goals of this study that we did were to determine whether the observed increase in thyroid cancer was due to a true increase in the prevalence of thyroid cancer, or if there's too much screening or overdiagnosis and findings of microcarcinomas of a small size that would probably have a pretty good prognosis and wouldn't lead to a lot of mortality. So the overall goals were to estimate and compare the temporal trends by histological type, size, and stage, which would all be important prognostic factors to tell us whether or not or how this thyroid cancer problem is changing. The methods were, it was a medical record study. And so this is just kind of my process visually of what I did in Cyprus. I had to access their pathology record status. They have Mosaic, which is an oncology medical record system, an electronic medical record system. So I had this big list that they gave me of all their thyroid cancer patients, I think from the beginning of time, because it wasn't necessarily within my diagnosis range. So we wanted to capture data from 1998 to 2014, which would match with their registry and most updated Ministry of Health information. So I had this huge list of 1,700 records that I needed to look through. So I started in their electronic system and had to figure out whether or not there was a pathology report in the patient file, because I'm extracting the size data of the tumor from the pathology reports that have been scanned, ideally, into each patient file. So I had to go through this whole list and figure out if there was a scan, whether or not it was in English, and then if there wasn't a scan, I had to mark it and come back to it later. So this is kind of the process where if it was scanned in English, I went ahead and captured the data. If it was in Greek, I made a note and saved it for later, and if there was no scan in the file, another note and another list. So a lot of list building in like the first 2 weeks. And then later, I had to go find the unscanned pathology reports, and this is down here a picture of their archives. So this is the basement archives, which are like the active archives, and then over here is the second floor archives, which are inactive patients and kind of bigger, older files. And there's my little desk, which I spent a lot of time at because it was just a lot of running through these records constantly. So this is an example of how I would extract data. This is a pathology report from an external pathologist, which is then sent to the oncology center, which is a treatment center. So it's not a hospital, they're not diagnosing at the VOCOC, they're just doing treatment. So they get pathology reports from the hospitals or external clinics. And I would go through and on my little score sheets make notes of the histopathological type and the size, sites of tumors, the TNM stage, and then any extra information, this kind of bottom half, was just dependent on the quality of the pathology report, so whether or not they talked about capsule infiltration or lymph nodes or any other coexisting thyroid diseases, just dependent on the pathology report quality. And because this was working up until the last minute, I have some very rough initial results, but the data analysis and trend reporting will have to happen in the next month or two, I think. So here's a summary of the reports that I was able to collect. And there were, thankfully, a majority in English, but also a lot of, so this Greek mosaic were the ones that were electronically scanned into the system. Greek archives were physical reports I had to go find, and then there was quite a few that had an unusable diagnosis date, but because this list that I received, doesn't have diagnosis date in it, I had to go through each file to figure out when the diagnosis date was, so that took a lot of time. And then a good handful that were just not found at all. And here's really quick summary statistics that I was able to do. You can see there's a majority of papillary thyroid cancer, which has a very good prognosis and are usually smaller type carcinomas. So, and this kind of matches what we know about US data and thyroid cancer overall, that papillary cancers account for like 90% of thyroid cancer. So, and again, we'll figure that more out as I go through it. And then papillary follicular variant was another big size group. It was majority female, which also matches a lot of the data that we see. And there was a huge age range from 10 at the youngest to 82 at the oldest. And I was maybe a little surprised that the male and female ages were so similar, because thyroid cancer occurs, or at least what I heard from the doctors there, that they see a lot of young females. So I kind of expected the female mean to be a little short, they're a little smaller, but they were very similar. So we have this question of remaining data that we still need to get. And I had to bring back in scans pathology reports that were in Greek that we will need to translate. And thankfully my advisor, Dr. Farazi, speaks Greek, so that will be a big help. And then again, there's data from reports that are still in their electronic health system that we can have BOCOC staff assist translate. And then there's Ministry of Health records that we need to access, and that can occur at a later date to help complete the data set. So the proposed future analysis is annual % change for histology types and tumor stages, and of course age adjusted, and we'll do cohorts by age and sex and things like that. Then we're going to compare the results with the US SEER data to see if there's any differences or maybe something different about the etiology in Cyprus. And then I was also thinking about future analysis of these extra variables that we found, which were given to me as a suggestion by a doctor that I was working with. I had just planned to go in and get size and stage and TNM and things like that. But he suggested, I think based on his own personal interest, that I collect the lobe size from the thyroidectomy, capsule infiltration, the lymph node ratio based on the number of lymph nodes excised during the thyroidectomy, and then any coexisting thyroid disease. And so this was a co-investigator, Dr. Frangos at the BOCOC, who was interested in having these data for himself, I think. But I think it would be interesting. So here's a really quick slide about my learning experience. I don't have any pictures of us at work. I just have pictures of us out and about. And so a couple of big takeaways that I had were it was my first time experiencing the formal research application process and doing an IRB and doing all these applications and applying to foreign health services and things like that, which also played into time management and kind of being adaptable as maybe problems arose or it took longer to get through applications that I thought, and working through that, which was, I think, good experience. And then another big one that I found very helpful about the Bank of Cyprus Oncology Center was utilizing resources. Like, here we have my favorite secretary, Gabby. A lot of the staff there was very willing to help and very willing to give me their time and energy, like the archive staff especially. I was worried about time with so many records and going through all those physical records. They were very willing to sit with me and pull records for me, and so I could process them really quickly, because if I had to pull them myself, I think it would have taken much longer. So just utilizing the staff that was there was very helpful. And I touched on that. Working with medical records was new to me, and being able to go through all these documents as quickly as possible, and also kind of the problems of variability between pathology reports, because there are several external clinics that they use to diagnose thyroid cancer, and then also the general hospital can send them pathology reports, and so there's a wide variation in quality and and data reported and variables reported in those reports. So just working with different things like that. And then the oncology center environment, just being able to see the doctors interact with patients and hear their attitudes about working as oncologists and staying positive and being able to give those positive feelings to patients was really good to see, because I was able to interact with a lot of different staff there. So that was, I think, a good experience. And I have quite a few ideas for future students, I think, but depending on like what you're willing to do with the Greek records, I think. Yeah, a big one, and I think we just touched on this in the last presentation, was standardization of reports, and so you can have better data collection. I could definitely tell over time that the quality of the reports got better, and it was interesting to see how different clinics. There was one doctor that I really liked that had these great pathology reports, and over 10 years his got just increasingly better, whereas a lot of people were kind of general about where the site was and things like that. So maybe standardizing pathology reports that we touched on. There was a lot about, in these patient files, they had a lot of nuclear medicine and radiotherapy reports. So I didn't really read them or look into them, but the data exists in these files, and I think is more consistent than pathology reports, because the pathology reports are external, whereas these nuclear medicine reports are internally generated, and they're always in the patient file. So they're also in Greek, but if you were looking for like quantitative data, that would be there. There's also fine needle aspiration reports for a lot of patients. It was a variable that I collected, but if you wanted to go back and look at the level of risk based on the FNA report, I think that would exist for a lot of patients. And then also, this is just kind of an idea I developed throughout the weeks about bilobe thyroidectomies, because it was interesting to see in these pathology reports that maybe they only detected through the FNA the hot nodule on one side, but they go in and take out two, but there's only one tumor on one side, but they've taken out the entire thyroid. And I don't really know the research or the guidelines about thyroidectomies, but that could be interesting. And then, of course, expansion to other cancers, because I assume and was kind of able to see that they have pathology reports for other cancer types. So there could be a lot there if you were willing to go and work with them. And so this is my strengths and limitations of the VOCOC. Like I touched on, the staff was amazing and just very willing to help, and a lot of them speak English, which was very helpful. And then the doctors that I worked with, Dr. Haralambous and Dr. Frangos, were very interested in doing research and could obviously believed in the importance of doing cancer research with their patient population. And then Mosaic, their electronic health records system, I thought was very nice to work with. I think they haven't imported data from, it's maybe updated from the last like 6 or 7 years. As it gets older, I had to go pull more files, but it is a very helpful resource. And then their physical archive system is really organized and very easy to work with, so that was good. And then the kind of biggest and only limitation was that records are in Greek. A lot of paperwork's in Greek, and so not having any exposure to the Greek language, it was difficult, of course, to, like, it wouldn't have been reasonable for me to translate pathology reports on my own just for fear of getting things wrong. And so the plan initially was to work with a doctor and have him help me translate, who was very familiar with thyroid cancer, but he ended up being really busy, so I was working with technicians, but they maybe didn't know the vocabulary as well, so it was just kind of, I was hesitant to do it on my own because I don't know the language, so that problem would arise with anybody who went there that wasn't familiar with the language. So then about me and future goals and career plan, I hope to go to medical school. I actually submitted my application while I was in Cyprus, and so that's kind of hopefully going to happen. But I'm very interested in research still and continuing that, and I think public policy is important to me as I'm involved in a lot of student government stuff here, and working with the Nebraska legislature has been really interesting. And then international work. This is kind of my first exposure to working internationally, and I really liked it and kind of hadn't thought about it before. So hopefully that can be a part of my career. And that's everything.
Thank you, Emma. Questions? Did you get any inkling of overdiagnosis? But that's a big topic right now in the United States, is doing too much with thyroid cancer. So that's the first question, was, is was there
Yeah.
some stuff with overdiagnosis. And the second thing is, is there any thought about if there's an increasing incidence radioactivity? I mean, is it, would Cyprus be downwind of Chernobyl or,
I hadn't even thought about that.
I mean, thyroid cancer has definitely been associated with radioactivity, and so there's a question. I mean, a question is there some way in which the island of Cyprus is getting more radioactive iodine in the water supply?
I think it's possible, and I had briefed over some reports of the island when I was doing my research, but I don't think I have a solid conclusion to give you on that. But it would be very interesting. I think there is some, and maybe even dietary exposure if that is part of the water system or something like that. I definitely need to look more into it. In terms of the overdiagnosis, because I haven't done the data analysis yet, I don't want to say what the size trends are, but I definitely saw a lot of microcarcinomas, which I think is less than 10 millimeters. There were a lot of single-digit millimeter carcinomas. And again, it could be biased just because I was looking through them and that's what I was looking for, but quite a few very small tumors.
That's a hot topic in the United States about are we doing too much for thyroid cancers that wouldn't really kill people.
Yeah, and I think the opinions of the doctors that I was working with kind of went either way. I think there was some concern that they were seeing more carcinomas, but they also were very aware that some of these were incredibly small, and they're getting a lot of them. So I definitely think the data will be able to answer that a little better.
Yeah, the third thing is that medullary carcinoma, which is a small percentage, at least half of those are genetic, And so the question is, and you can do screening within families for those when you identify them. So, that might be a light bulb goes on, try and investigate medullary carcinoma and see if there's any running it in families.
Other questions, comments?
I have a question. You mentioned having data on FNA, and I was wondering if you were planning on looking at the trends of use in FNA.
I think I wasn't, because I don't think my data lends itself to that, but I think someone could potentially, if the records are there, and because I think one of my problems was the pathology report of the thyroidectomy would sometimes indicate that there had been an FNA and sometimes not. And I can't tell why or why not, and sometimes there would be a separate FNA report. So it's there, and I think somebody could definitely do it, because there were reports of FNA from some of even the latest or the oldest files. So I think it could definitely happen if it was all there.
Okay, thank you, Emma.